Welcome to Crucible Cloudworks Live. My name is Chris, and each week we'll be interviewing professionals in their respective fields to get a behind-the-scenes look at what their day-to-day life is like and what it took to get there. It is my goal to empower you to find a role that you feel confident in, and maybe by listening to our guests speak, you too can find your way. Wherever you are right now, you're in the right place. So let's get started. Hey everybody, so thank you for joining us today. Today we're sitting down with Ted Royer, who is the former creative director at Droga5. So how are you feeling today, Ted?
Good. I'm on a chair that has wheels, and I've just learned that it's a new chair, and the floor of my home office is slanted, so I'm almost constantly rolling backwards. So if I
Oh
look like I'm
no.
struggling, it's because of that, and I really should have put something behind the wheels of the chair. But other than that, great. Thank you.
All right. So whereabouts is it, this home office of yours that has so many weird slanted floors now? You know, are you like in like the Bermuda Triangle or something?
Not
Or
not at all. I'm in New York City.
okay.
I've lived here for 24 years now, which is surprising. I was fortunate enough that my career took me around the world
Hmm.
to Singapore, Australia, Argentina, and when I came back to New York, I thought I'd give it 2 years, and it's been 24. So New York City has a way of really pulling you in and keeping you here.
All right.
It's quite powerful.
And the thing is, with New York being so integral to your industry was marketing, correct?
Yes, I've been in advertising my entire life,
Okay.
my entire work life.
Oh, okay. I see. So was Droga5 an agency? How did that begin?
Droga Five was one of the later agencies I worked in, and that was an agency founded by David Droga. And I joined, I think, about 3 or 4 months after when we were. I think I was employee number 8. And when I left, it had grown to about 750 or 800 people.
Oh my
And
goodness.
eventually, the agency sold to Accenture, and it was quite a run and quite a success story.
All right. So, having been involved in Droga5 from almost the very beginning, what was it? What was the feeling like seeing so many changes in the industry over time? Because clearly, advertising is not the same as it used to be.
Wow, I'd love to hear your point of view on that because I too think advertising is not what it used to be, and I have several theories as to why that is. But
Okay.
it was, I feel like Droga Five was formed in the tail end of, I think, one of advertising's golden ages, really, where the internet had taken off in the 90s and early 2000s, and our thinking had to expand to fill this amazing space
Hmm.
of digital marketing. And so the innovation was fantastic, and the agencies that thrived in that world, Crispin, uh, RGA, and Droga Five, and places like that, really embraced new technology as well as put great human stories and human spin on new technologies. So it was incredibly fun, and I think that all tapered off a few years ago, again for different reasons. But Droga Five came to life and matured in that very robust time where
Okay.
advertising had a lot of sway and swagger, if you will.
So that's we're kind of like looking at generally the late '90s period. That was the golden age of advertising. You think? Or
I'm actually working on a book about this.
okay.
I
I'd love
actually
to hear your
refer
theory. Yeah.
to the period of with a guy named Taris Wayner, who's another fantastic creative director. He and I had a lunch and concept of this book, and we started working on it. Where we're using the dates of say mid '90s, 1995, through to 2016, the election of Donald Trump,
Hmm.
but also the rise of creator culture and influencer culture. And between those periods, we really started talking about how advertising was wild and crazy and interesting, and had an extremely fertile, rich period
Right.
then. And it seemed to be again embracing new technology, but also this was before the rise of TikTok and other social media channels, where it feels like creative bravery and creative a lot of creative culture has migrated over to the individual,
Mm.
making fantastic. I'm not dissing TikTok. I'm a fan of TikTok.
Yeah.
I think it's incredible, and I think Reels is the same thing. The amount of comedy, the amount of interesting clips, philosophers, horror movies. There's so much richness happening
Yes.
over there. it feels a little bit, and this is one person's take, like the disposable creative mojo that advertising used to own has drifted over into influencer and creator culture.
Okay.
So before that happened, advertising had sort of the reins of disposability, but also like immediacy, reaction to events, and a sense of bravery that again, I'm not as into the industry as I used to be at all, but it seems like, and I've heard this from a lot of people, the sense of bravery and the sense of daringness has waned a bit. So we kind of identified that period, the mid 90s to the mid 2000 teens, as a time when advertising was very, very brave. And I'll add to that, and I'm just going to go on and on. Just tell me when to shut up. That's
all
when
good.
in the teens, it seems like that's when social media got extremely, I guess, more sensitive about what a brand could and couldn't say. And so brands now, I think, are rightly much more nervous about social backlash because it's powerful. And so if you're running a brand, why would you want to take a chance on a nutty idea when you could get backlash for it? So the ideas that happened in the early 2000s, I just don't think would happen today because that sense of, of course not. You'd agree, Chris.
We even see movies from back then, like a lot of the raunchy comedies, like Wedding Crashers, stuff like that from back then. We all know they would never get made today, right? So the cultural shift. I've never thought of that the cultural shift has impacted the advertising industry so much.
I remember there was a few different campaigns. There was a campaign which sort of epitomized to me the height of what we're calling it the Titanium Age, because that's when the Titanium Award was the award to win. It was the award for brave thinking, new thinking, and that really seemed to infuse.
Sorry, just to level set with those of us not in the know, such
please.
As myself. The Titanium Award, is that an advertising industry award?
Yes. So thank you for and please do that whenever I jump ahead because I tend to just blurt. The Titanium Award is an award from the Cannes International Festival of Creativity, which is probably the biggest advertising award show in the world. And it's held in the south of France, and it gives out Cannes Lions to the best work of the year. And the award that really rose to huge prominence in that time was the Titanium Award, which was an award for innovative thinking and really pushing the boundaries of things. And it was incredibly prestigious to win that award and very exciting. But that sense of we need to be pushing boundaries, we need to really find incredible new ways for our craft to come to life, that was like the highest mark in the industry. And so, there's things like the Golden Age, Silver Age. We found it interesting to take another medal, the Titanium Age, and define that period. And the book is about the Titanium Age in that period. And yeah.
I like that qualification because usually when people think of like the Golden Age, they'll think of 1950s stuff like that, where they think about like Arbor Hot Dog song, right? That's like iconic from the 50s, stuff like that. That sense of Americana. But I really like that Titanium Age differentiation because that was the time to shine. I mean, even myself working in the internet space, I like. A lot of people regret the fact that in the late 90s it was like panning for gold. It was literally an internet gold rush, right? And if you struck gold, you got rich, right? And I know a lot of people back then. I mean, even I used to work for a firm that literally the CEO would walk around with a wad of bills and just pay you that way, right? So
wow.
it was a strange time. That's this Titanium Age that I'm harkening back to.
It was strange. Do you remember just putting a video out on YouTube for the first time and watching likes start to count up? And that kind of feedback was new, and it was a bit of a rush. It was like, whoa, we're getting instant feedback and instant comments. Like that was very new at the time and very exciting. So you wanted to do work that would really break through and really be interesting, so that you could get that positive feedback. And I was going to say, I remember a campaign because I was thinking about Cliff Freeman. I don't know if you remember the agency Cliff Freeman. In the early 2000s, they did a campaign for a company called Outpost.com. And they did that campaign was sort of the epitome of outrageous attention getting in the .com era, the first .com era, where they did these ads that were just designed to completely free people out and push the boundaries. And that, to me, epitomized how far we wanted to stretch things at that time. One of the ads was, it's a guy sitting in a chair. He's like, for Outpost.com, we wanted to get attention. So what we're doing is we're tattooing the name of our company on little children's foreheads. And you see all these kids getting Outpost.com tattooed to the forehead, and they're crying. Right. Or another one was like, we decided to shoot hamsters through into this hard target, this wall. And you see the hamsters hitting it, they're squeaking, and it's cruel and crazy. And that, like it or not, it was the epitome of, we wanted to push boundaries. We wanted to see how far we can go to get attention. And everyone felt in the joke with it, like, oh, where can we go now? Oh, you see this brand did this. Oh, this brand did this. It was kind of exciting and a bit of a Wild West feel, anything goes kind of feel.
Yeah, even myself, I'm recalling some of the ads I saw around that period. I mean, they had everything back then. They had I remember seeing boxing matches with the goldenpalacecasino.com. Guys back. I remember that.
Yeah.
I remember
right.
Even something like the from around that Titanium age, we had like the Quiznos Sponge Monkeys, right? I mean, nobody knew what it was, but it's like, hey, let's just try it, see if it works, I guess, right?
Yeah. And they had, around that time too, they had a really good tagline, which was just toasty.
Tasty, yeah.
And I remember thinking, oh, is in a tagline now. That's really like, that was sort of pushing what taglines are usually were back then, usually very stuffy, like quality food at a great price or something. And that just going toasty was just like kind of refreshing and really nice. And it was always like that. It was like the people that we admired most at the time, or my peers at the time, we were always playing with the form. How can we play with the form? How can we do something surprising and different?
Kind of like push the boundaries, right?
Push the boundaries. And I think too, also, we sought to get an audience that we knew was intelligent. We sort of said, oh, the audience will get this, because I always think people are smarter than a lot of advertising gives them credit for. So I always tried to do work that would complement someone's intelligence, or understand that I knew they would understand what was going on. You know what I mean? Even my explanation didn't make much sense, but you understand what I mean. Like I never thought the audience was dumb.
Right. Like, and to tell you the truth, I'm thinking in my head here, and I wish we could cut away to a clip, because this really reminds me of a clip I saw Frank Zappa, who was relating to the music industry, right? I think you know the one I'm talking about, where he talks about how, hey, originally, like, we had these suits in the A&R rooms, and they just bring him any music, and he's like, I don't know what it is, but maybe the kids like it, just put it out there.
So they hire a hippie. They're bringing the guy with the long hair. Now, they're not going to trust him to do anything except carry coffee and bring the mail in and out. He starts in there. He's carry the coffee. Well, we can trust him. He brought the coffee 4 times on time. Let's give him a real job. Okay, he becomes an A&R man. From there, moving up and up and up, next thing you know, he's got his feet on the desk, and he's saying, well, we can't take a chance on this, because it's just simply, that's not what the kids really want, and I know. And they got that attitude. And the day you get rid of that attitude and get back to, who knows, take a chance, that entrepreneurial spirit where, even if you don't like or understand what the record is that's coming in the door, the person who is in the executive chair may not be the final arbiter of taste of the entire population,
There. Yeah. And what you're describing about the Titanium Age really reminds me of that. Like, this internet was suddenly just a huge new frontier. Nobody knew what was going on. Just put it out there, see what happens.
Just put it out there, see what happens.
But then later on, when those kids get rewarded for discovering the new thing, and they get to be the ones in control, suddenly they become the gatekeepers, right? And if anything, that's kind of essentially what has happened to the internet, if you think about it. Like, even from our channel struggles breaking in on YouTube and fighting that algorithm, because I mean, what can I do that Mr. Beast won't, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, he's sort of going through it now. Anyway,
well, that's a different thing entirely. Yeah, that's probably a bad example.
But I think your main example is right. The ability to create has been fully democratized. So now, one of my favorite creators on TikTok is a guy named, I think his name is Spencer Lackey. He's just home in his apartment making horror movies, making little tiny horror movies. And he's made dozens of them, maybe hundreds. And they're always hilarious and creepy, and there's always a jump scare. This is a person just sitting in his apartment and going to his basement and making these creepy films. We have seen a real democratization of creativity that has seeped from corporations and filmmakers out to everybody. I think it's great and I think it's fascinating. I don't think it's great for brands because these creators can get away with doing a whole bunch where brands are being held now to and more sensitive now to criticism than ever before.
Yeah.
Creators can go any way they want to. They can be outrageous. They can take hardcore political stances if they want, or they can be quite graphic if they want, you know?
So the thing is that does bring into something that I've noticed in amongst these different platforms. So I know that TikTok, a large part of its meteoric success was the fact that it suddenly emphasized their algorithm encourages similar content, and it doesn't really favor larger creators the same way, right? So at least from my layman's understanding, TikTok has a far more democratizing algorithm, I guess you could call it, right? And
as opposed to say YouTube.
Correct. Yes. Yeah. And
you sound smarter about it than I am, but I think you're generally that seems accurate.
Oh, well, I mean, I'm not that bright. I just look smart on TV, right? But that's how the saying goes. But I think, do you have any opinion then, as far as which one was going to win in the long run? I mean, do you need like a more kind of corporate guidance, kind of like as YouTube seems to have these days, or is TikTok more like the Wild Wild West type algorithm going to succeed in the long run?
I think that's really fascinating. I think I can only go back to how I consume. And I think YouTube, I consume far longer videos and probably a smaller handful of creators who make basically a lot of documentary style stuff, or a lot of film criticism stuff, or film analysis, and some political debates, some other types of debates. But I consume YouTube with more robust, if you will, content. Whereas TikTok, I expect that disposability, and I go there for a barrage of great creative and interesting stuff. And of course, if you don't like it, nope, gone. And I watch it with my daughter. We watch kittens and puppies and cute animals, and there's an endless supply of that too. Yeah. So it's pretty versatile and amazing, but I think more disposable. And I think I probably take it less seriously than the content on YouTube, where I follow probably more than I follow any TV show. I follow regular shows on YouTube.
Okay. So going back to your own career then, and Droga 5, you were with Droga 5 then, I guess, through most of the gilded titanium age, right? Can you gild titanium? I'll have to check that later.
That might ruin the look of the titanium.
Yeah. The shiny titanium age. Yeah.
I was there for 12 years, and they were 12 magnificent years, and the agency grew at an astonishing pace. And the great thing about Droga 5 was, and I always say this, it was a very creative atmosphere that really rewarded people for being their best. At least that was our intention. It was always like, come here and we want you to be your very best, your most creative. And if you are, we'll work really hard. I'll work really hard to sell that great work of yours, and I'll make sure that your career gets better. I'll make sure that when you leave here, you're going to make, my mantra is always, when you leave here, you're going to make so much money that I can't match your new salary. That was like, if that happened, I'd be like, great, we succeeded. You got a much bigger job than I can pay for now.
Yeah.
What's that? Go ahead.
Were employees compensated in ways other than just salary? I mean, was there like commission on certain work or royalties or?
Not for creatives, no.
Okay.
It was almost always salaries, bonuses.
Okay.
There were spot bonuses, and there were also year-end bonuses. But no, I think much more the new business team would work on different forms of commission and things like that. But no, creatives are, or at least they were at the time, salaried people.
All right. And I guess in terms of being a creative director and directing these creatives, how many people would you direct at the height of your career there?
At the height, I think the creative department, just pure advertising creatives, had about over 100.
Oh my
The design
goodness.
department probably had 30, 35 at the time. But then that also included project management, which are crucial to an agency. Project managers make sure the work is going through the system where it should be, and the people held accountable are doing the things that keep the work propelled through the system. And they fell under creative at the time. And then also staffing, creative recruiting, all those things. So a lot of time, by the time we got much bigger, a lot of my day was spent doing the administrative stuff and not nearly as much doing the creative stuff. So by the end, I was talking almost exclusively with the ECDs, executive creative directors, and making sure they were the stars to their teams and the creatives underneath. But it's a common theme that when people move up, they move out of the creative, fun, passionate stuff and much more into administrative stuff, which is a bit of a lamentation because the creative stuff is the fun stuff. The creative stuff is where you want to be. Yeah, for sure.
Do you wish to talk about, leaving Droga 5 or?
Sure. I can talk about it in general terms. It was not comfortable.
I understand.
It was during the Me Too movement that
okay.
an anonymous group started posting about me very aggressively and hit at a time when we were trying to sell the agency. And so there was a confluence of all these feelings and emotions, and the world was getting very, very tense then.
Yeah.
And we parted ways, but not well. But I don't want to talk too much about it, but
Understood.
The group that said things were horrible and none of it was true. And some of these social media movements are quite unforgiving.
Yeah.
And they look for villains. And so people weren't really in the most forgiving of moods. We see it today with some of the stuff that's happening in the DNC right now, the protests.
Cancellations
Cancellations have become much more a way of life.
Yeah.
Now, back then they were it was 2018. It was still pretty fresh. And so the shock was quite greater, but I have no ill will toward Droga 5. I love that place. The 12 years there were just blistering and creative and great. And the people were wonderful. It's just one of those things where everyone was trying to act in the best interests that they knew how.
Yeah.
It just didn't work out great for me, but I don't hold any ill will because I did love that place and they did what they thought was right. And even when I would let people go, I'd say, it's not the right place for you. It's nothing about you. It's just not the right fit. I became not the right fit very quickly after a pretty successful time. But they are a fast moving, smart organization, and they did what they had to do.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And in fact, I've known a few other people to, suddenly be thrust into the role of a villain, right? And it's never an easy thing. I guess I don't want to touch too much maybe on the subject itself, but I think the recovery is what a lot of people are really interested in these days.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Chris, because the first book I finished is about that. It's about cancellation and recovery and finding grace and finding a sense that the world isn't terrible and really recovering. And I think I made the way to this podcast through a mutual friend we have who,
right.
I think if you scratch the surface, everyone's going through stuff. And so really cancellation in its the more ubiquitous it gets, the more it becomes a thing that people deal with. So I think there is a timeliness now to there was an article in the New York Times recently, like, what do we do with canceled people? Yeah. And I think that's going to be something that we're going to have to address. And that's what this other book is about right now. It's like, how do we get through this? How does culture maybe evolve to not be so black and white about issues? And maybe there are going to be mechanisms we can create that help to deal with conflict that don't involve lawyers. Because that's not
lawyers are expensive. Yeah.
And scary. Lawyers are really scary. Like they can really, I don't know if we can curse here, but they can really you up.
Oh, you curse if you want. So
okay, good. Well, they can really fuck you up.
Yes.
And also, I think the burdens on HR are enormous these days, just enormous. And is HR fully equipped, or do they have the mandate to handle the amount of emotions involved, the amount of humanity that's swirling around in companies? I don't know. There's some of the HR people I talk to who are like, it's really stressful now, and so. Have we created all the mechanisms that really deal with the pain that inevitably is going to arise when human beings are working in pressured environments?
Right.
But
what's really funny, actually? I find that despite your experience, you still have a much more positive outlook on HR than I do, right? So for me, like I've had a few run-ins with HR before, not necessarily because I'm in trouble so much as because I will say something like, look, I know it's just your job to protect the company, so don't pretend like you care about me or something. And some people take an enormous amount of offense to it. I remember I had one woman, she was nearly in tears. She's like, I can't believe you would say that about me. Of course I care about everybody I work with. And it's like, I get it, but at the end of the day, if it's the company or me, you're gonna side with the company. I know that, right? And I'm just trying to be realistic with her, and she's like, thinking it's an insult. So, yeah.
I think you've outlined a tough problem because HR is often, and I know some fantastic people in HR, and I really empathize with what they have, the burden they have to carry, and they're often tasked to be the safe space, the person that cares, the empathetic person who really wants to listen to your problems. But you're right; they're also tasked with how do you make sure whatever situation has arisen is not going to blow up the company in some way. So it is a really difficult position that they're often put in. And I mean, I don't know if I would feel this way, except I've had amazing relationships with great HR people in the past. And I just have to say, like, again, they're human like all of us. And they're going through it as well. And I hear these days that they are especially burdened, or at least have been the last few years. I don't know if it's getting better or not. But
true. I mean, I never thought about it that way. I mean, but they're probably literally trying to, like, dance on the what's that saying? Dance on the head of a pin right now. So there's probably far too many things you got to thread through carefully, right? So
I think so. There's, I mean, work it doesn't sound like it's the best it's ever been these days. I think some of your questions wanted to touch on that.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not nearly as involved as the ad industry as I used to be, but I hear a lot of stories. I still have a lot of friends, and it sounds difficult, and it makes me sad because I love the advertising industry and I love advertising people. They've always been funny and smart and great, and it kind of breaks my heart to see an industry that I love so much struggling a bit. But it's also very adaptive.
Yeah.
And it's also very clever. One of my favorite stories is I was at something called The One Show. I don't know if you know The One Show.
I'm not aware.
One Club is a great creative organization. Absolutely, I think one of the best in the world. A bastion of creativity and creative support. And at The One Show, which was the award show they had every year, I was sitting next to a person who was from Silicon Valley. He was visiting, and he worked for, I can't remember who, one of the Silicon Valley brands. And he had never been to an advertising award show. And they were showing all the winning work. Piece after piece after piece, all the case studies, all the digital creations, very titanium age stuff. And this person turned to me and said, this is the best amount of work. This is the best grouping of work I've ever seen. This is amazing. Yeah. And I said, this is 1 year. This is 1 year of the industry. We do this every single year. So it's a very clever industry. It's a very adaptive industry. And I have no doubt it will find its way out of whatever troubles it might be in now, because it's hard to hold down the ingenuity of people.
So one question then, as an ingenious person, that's the word.
You did it.
As a person possessing in great quantities of ingenuity, do you ever find yourself that you're in the position where every project you have to top yourself?
Oh yeah, that was quite a feeling for years at Droga 5. Every year it was like, how are we going to beat this last year?
Yeah.
What are we going to do? And it was invigorating, but also incredibly stressful. We would have an extremely successful year, and then it'd be like, what do we do now? Like, yeah. And we had to do it again next year, and do it again next year. And I often compare it to, not that I'm as talented as any of these people, so please don't think that I think I'm like, great rock bands, but great rock bands every year. Like, imagine being Led Zeppelin. And
you took the words right out of my mouth, because it's literally rock star syndrome, right? And I remember it from I was watching one of those really bad VH1 documentaries about like Def Leppard. But one thing I always say is, like, even in the worst of things, if you can just grab a few nuggets of wisdom, it's always worth it, right? And the one guy playing Steve, he's the guitarist from Def Leppard who killed himself. No, overdose. Ooh. I'm sorry. Yeah. But he gave the speech about how, it's great. We sell 6 million records. What are we going to do next, right? Try to sell 7 million, try to sell 8 million. And I think it's that treadmill that leads to possibly burnout that need to always exceed, right?
It does. I think that's very true. It leads to abuse of alcohol or substances. It leads to a pressure cooker atmosphere. But also when I did get fired, I gave a speech about a year later about a lot of it. And one of the sentences I said was I believed in the rock star mentality, and got very criticized for that because the industry feels like we shouldn't be glorifying anybody as rock stars anymore, which
Yeah.
wasn't what I meant. I meant that it's sort of what you're saying, the idea that we need to achieve so much and that we have to, fake it till you make it. Like everyone
Yeah.
has like this swagger, and you have to act like you're not dying inside. You have
Yeah.
to act like I do have all the answers. When you're in a room pitching, you're like, I have all the answers, and inside you're like, I don't know anything. What are you talking about? So that kind of swagger is craved for in business, and yet then criticized if it goes too far. You know what I mean? Like, so it's a tough one. It's a tough one to. The most successful people, sadly, I know, are probably a little bit sociopathic,
Yeah.
and certainly narcissistic. So American business rewards narcissism and sociopathy, and then freaks out when people are narcissists and sociopaths.
Right.
And it's like, well, what'd you expect?
At the same time, then, I mean, considering is all these high pressure situations, and I'm sure even now you find yourself in them day by day. Do you have any rituals or anything on a professional level to help maintain your mental health?
That's a great question, and the answer is not enough. But yes, there are things that I have learned and been taught over the last few years that really, really help. And they're going to sound very self-helpy and very cliche, but they do work.
Right.
Where like one of them is in the morning when I first wake up. That's when a lot of flood of doubt and negativity and fear for the day might hit you. And I do a thing where I practice gratitude. I told you this to feel like a Hallmark card or something, but I do. I actually start listing all the things I'm incredibly grateful for and all the things that I have going on that are exciting and great. And I force myself to focus on that stuff so that by the time I get up to go take a shower, I'm like, okay, all right, great. Things are good. Things are good. And they may not be good at all. But it's a trick to get your brain out of whatever doldrums you might be in, which I was plagued with for years. So that very negative thinking. Negative thinking, your ego is your own worst enemy. I could go off on this forever, but it's true. And creative people especially, their ego is very wound up in their work. And so their ego can turn on them very easily and fill them with self-doubt and fill them with negativity. And it's something that you have to be aware of and push back on.
So one pattern actually that you just mentioned that I've noticed with a lot of highly creative people is that they'll start the day kind of like very difficult to ease into it. That's when the depression and everything hits. And yet when it comes, when night falls, they're like just a firecracker. Everything's going off. They're coming up with all their ideas. Yeah. So given such a cycle, how is it maintainable in the long run? Because you're revved up all night, ready to work. You've got all the ideas, you've got the juices flowing, and then you've got to crash, I guess, eventually, and then you've got to drag yourself out of bed in the morning. Is there what would your advice be to other creatives to try to maintain a healthy cycle?
Sorry, I interrupted you.
Not
a
at
great
all.
question, Chris, and it's an eternal question. And I think there's a bit of a misperception in your setup because I used to be that way too. My best fertile period was like 9 o'clock at night.
Yeah.
And I'd just be like, oh my God, what about this? What about that? Maybe helped by a drink or something like that, where it's like, oh, this is good, because I felt loose then. But then I realized and I learned that creative people have a few hours a day when they are at their best creatively. I'd say 3 hours a day, where you are primed for creating. The rest of the day is recovery or letting your subconscious mind do its work. So say, for example, you have something you're trying to think of. You work at it hard for 3 hours, and then when you feel yourself hitting that wall, you stop. And you go away and you let your subconscious work on it. So when you go back again, the subconscious is extremely powerful. It's been working on it. I think creatives have to identify when they are going to be at their most creative, that burst. I call it the burst of 3 hours a day. It might be in the morning. It might be at night. It might shift depending on how well you slept. But be very conscious of when is my maximum creative burst time going to be. And don't pressure yourself when you're out of that burst, beating your head against the wall, because it's brutal when you're not feeling creative and you have to perform. I think it's gold to identify, okay, I'm in my zone right now. This is great. and then I'm slipping out of my zone, pencils down. I'm going to go do busy work. I'm going to go do administrative work. I'm going to go for a walk. I'm going to play with my kids. I'm going to let my subconscious work on the problem now, because that's what happens. Your conscious mind pushes it back in the subconscious, and you might be out walking your dog or something. You're like, oh shit, that's good. Actually, that's really good.
Yeah.
Your subconscious is way more powerful than your conscious mind. So hitting that burst really hard, knowing when that is, and then having it slip back and having your subconscious work on it after you've set up that conscious work is really, really strong. That really works for me. And when I've told people that same thing, creatives love to embrace it. They're like, oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And that's why whenever I freelance people, I'm just going to say, whenever I freelance people who have jobs already.
Yeah.
Because I know they're going to give me their burst, because that's their side job. So 3 hours a day is your burst, and don't beat yourself up if you're not that productive around that.
So that's actually great advice, because the thing is, and not to go off on too much of a tangent here, because I think a lot of coders, developers, they're the exact same way, right? And just, again, not too much of a tangent, but I think there's a false dichotomy between the whole left brain, right brain thing. I mean, a lot of the most creative, logical people, coders, programmers, and they'll have, musical interest, they'll know everything about that. And I don't think that dichotomy exists. And similarly, I find that for a lot of developers, they have that burst or that flow state. They can only enter for a few hours a day. But then this goes to the question of, yourself as you rose the ranks, as you were a manager. How would you explain that to senior management, right?
Well,
that someone's only effective really a few hours a day.
Yeah,
right?
I didn't really know that until a few years ago, that effectiveness window. I was a big believer in we just work all the time.
Yeah.
But also the funny thing about creatives is when you're doing your job, you're often staring at the ceiling, or just throwing a pencil against the ceiling, or just you look like you're not doing anything.
Yeah.
So because you look like you're not doing anything, people come up and interrupt you all the time. And it's I might look like I'm not doing anything, but I'm actually working really hard right now. You know what I mean? So I think getting uninterrupted time when you're in that, and I love that you brought up flow, because flow is real and it's amazing if you can tap into it. Know that flow state, and then don't get interrupted by that flow state, because it's valuable. That's valuable real estate in your brain. That's really valuable stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember, I don't know. And often when it looks like you're not really doing something, that's your best stuff. And I remember that being taken for granted all the time. Oh, you'll come up with something. No, I need to have that time to really come up with it, and to hone it, and to think about it, and to visualize it. So, yeah.
The thing is, though, I mean, in the current state, especially in the current corporate environment where, you're accountable for every single hour, stuff like that, I could not even imagine what it's like for Accenture, like you said, I mean, those cats there that they have to make every 15 minutes accountable like that. I could not even imagine what it's like to try to justify the fact that, look, I'm going to be just sitting here looking at Facebook half the day until something hits me, right? But that's a very real thing, I think. So do you feel that corporate culture needs to adjust for some of these sad realities, or?
That's a great question, and it's probably a much larger question than I could answer. But I do have I have thoughts.
Well, you're here for your thoughts, sir. We value your thoughts. When we
shifted, thank you very much. This is fun, by the way. I'm having a great time. You ask really good questions. I remember when we shifted from a much more loose structure of people just working on stuff to really nailing down people to match pieces of business or to match hours. This person can only stay here if they're on this account 50% of the time. And then, so once we got probably necessarily much more corporate, I felt something of a spark left, because I remember when we were pitching Dr. Pepper, this is maybe year 2 when we were in the agency. We were pitching Dr. Pepper, and we were throwing ideas up on the walls. And one of my favorite creatives, Cam Blackley, he's a great CCO in Australia. He came in, he just started putting stuff on the wall, and I'm like, you're not on this pitch. He goes, I don't care. And he was just throwing stuff up there and re-art directing things. And I was like, that is the spirit of the agency. That's so good. It felt like all hands, everyone's win was everyone's win. You know what I mean? If this group won, everyone won. There was a real sense of we're here for each other. And when you start siloing it off, I remember noticing there were accounts where people would have to do their time on it and then get onto something good. And I'm like, well, that's not great, because we used to have no accounts like that. It used to be everything was an opportunity, and everything was seen as robust. Like we won Prudential at one point, Prudential, big corporate client, and a lot of people were like, oh, now you're going to suck. I'm like, no, we're not. And we really tried even harder on Prudential than we did a lot of other brands because the challenge was so great. But you're right. Corporate culture has a way of smashing us down into quantifiable bits that make sense in a boardroom and make sense on a balance sheet, but don't always make sense to the creative mind.
Yeah. And I think it's infected a lot of work product anyway, because I mean, we live in an environment where, you've got project managers always saying, oh, how many resources would we have for this? It's like, people aren't resources, that's once again, maybe that's why the human resources thing sticks out to me so much. So
yeah, you sounds like you've got some stories to tell.
I'm just, I mean, I smile, but deep down, I think we're all kind of bitter, but it is what it is. Right. And honestly, I think in a lot of ways, though, I think failure is the fuel for a lot of our growth. Right. I've always said, for me, like, I don't want to work on a team with someone who's never been fired. Right. Because the thing is, you need that spark in your life. And for you, this has been like a great conversation. And I can tell that, I'm sorry to hear about what happened with Droga. The fact that you're able to walk away with it with your head held high, and you're not, you don't seem too bitter about it, right? And the fact that I think that's something that a lot of us should learn from. I think maybe that's going to be the next litmus test. Every man in his life has to be fired once, has to be canceled once, right? But
I mean, it's happening all the time. But I love what you said about failure. I think people become much more interesting. At least ever since I was canceled, a lot of people reach out to me who maybe never would have, or I've been able to talk to people who've been through something huge in their life. And I do think no matter what tragedy or thing they've been through, they often come out of it much more empathetic. And I have to say also much more interesting, because that is hard-won wisdom. Yeah. And wisdom is phenomenal. Wisdom is, we give up everything for wisdom. We give up our bodies, we give up our youth, but the only thing we can carry with us is wisdom. And people who've really been through the shit, really been through it, they have a sense of wisdom and perspective, which is really amazing and really tough. People who've had easy lives aren't that interesting compared to the person who's like really been through it and they're still walking around, going, hey, let's do this. It's, I don't know. It's fascinating to talk to people who've lived life and had life wallop them in the face, and they've gotten up and gone, all right, let's keep going.
Yeah. And I think, maybe just to try to like pivot on a point to end on, the clickbait point to end on, mind you, I'm doing this totally for clickbait, just making it totally apparent out there, with everyone complaining then about, hey, Gen Z doesn't know how to work anymore. Everybody complaining about, Gen Z being so lazy, everything else like that. Would you feel that maybe part of that struggle has been really that Gen Z hasn't really been through any sort of failure, any sort of trouble? They've been kind of like put in a bubble for the longest time.
Oh no, I don't agree with that at all. I think I think they're like any other generation. They grew up with a certain amount of pressures, and they're reacting to those pressures. I've worked with some Gen Z people who were phenomenally motivated and really great. I actually admire their healthy distrust to organizations, because they've seen people get, bulldozed by corporations. They've seen how corporations try to tell you that they're a family. They're not a family. Right. And I like that Gen Z calls bullshit on that. But also, Gen Z has been surrounded by a barrage of social media and a barrage of success. So they have a ton of... I grew up in the 80s. We were surrounded by the threat of nuclear war. That was a big, scary one. Their nuclear war is almost the pressure that social media is putting on them to succeed, to seem like they're succeeding, and to make it now. And you brought up Mr. Beast before. I've watched a lot of the videos criticizing Mr. Beast. Everyone's all a little bit crazy with the fame. Like they've gone kind of off the deep end with the fame. I think a lot of Gen Z is probably feeling that extraordinary sense of pressure to make it now, to make it early, and also to see companies as being sort of in the way of that. It's just another set of pressures that another generation is facing. It's just different from the ones that I grew up with. And I don't know how old or young you are, but maybe different from the ones you grew up with. But on a personal level, I've worked with some Gen Z people that are amazing, that are very motivated. I know they're supposed to say work is oppression and all that. And some people seem to think that. But the ones I work with are go-getters. They're just maybe more loyal to themselves than they are to a company or its mission.
That's actually a really good point, and I'll concede this point to you because you're right. I think as long as you understand that the current generation has adapted to the fact that, like, it is a dog eat dog world, right? And they don't have that loyalty, but at the same time, they've seen an entire generation burned on the fact that they placed their loyalty in the wrong places. I mean, these are kids that grew up with, broken households. These are kids that grew up with, like, watching 9/11 every single day. And I'm about your age, just to put it that way, and yeah, we were afraid of the bomb, but that was such a threat that we could not even conceptualize, right?
It was
like,
just
for
abstract.
Us, yeah, for us, it's like, hey, stop, drop, and cover, but we all knew that didn't count, right?
And I went to an all-boys school. Yeah. I went to an all-boys school, and I grew up with the threat of fistfights every day. And it was pretty scary. And that doesn't happen now. But imagine it. I mean, I went through some social shaming, some real shame.
Yeah.
And it was really debilitating. And I was 50 when I went through it. I can't imagine how that feels for a 15-year-old to go through social media shaming right now. This is the scary, tough world they're growing up in. They know that if they have an opinion someone doesn't like, they'll get roasted, or their friend group could turn on them. This is a scary environment.
Yeah.
So for them to have a sense of self-preservation, or a sense of I need to think about myself first, and maybe do something that to us might seem strange. I can only imagine how being young in an atmosphere of social media turmoil and fear is really, really scary. So kudos to anybody who's surviving in that world, because it's quite astonishing to my Gen X brain that these Gen Zers go through this gauntlet.
Yeah. And I think the thing a lot of us Gen Xers don't understand is we had our safe space, right? Like, no matter how bad my day was at school, hey, I come home, my mom would leave me microwave fish sticks or something like that, and I could just go eat that and play video games for 3 hours. No one would know, and that'd be fine. Whereas with kids these days, because of their phone, it just keeps following them over and over.
It keeps following them. You're right.
Yeah.
How strange that the entire world is in your face, and access to the entire world is in your face all the time. No wonder they don't feel safe. It's a barrage of bad news, of comments, of you have to be on, you have to be performing. You made a great point, Chris. I love this point. It's so smart. The entire world was a safe space to us.
Yeah.
Like we were never being looked at. We were never being judged. We were on the school bus.
We were being forgotten, literally. Right. So
I was being forgotten. Both my parents worked. I never had a curfew. I went home because my friends went home. They had curfews. I never had a curfew. My parents were too tired. They were both working. And so I'd go home and everybody would be asleep. I'd be like, no one cares. Yeah. But you're right. We could be invisible whenever we wanted to. It must be a terrifying thing from the moment you become aware. And I've got 2 little kids. I think about this all the time. They are not invisible. They are having the world in their face constantly through a device that never leaves. I'm never without my phone, ever. Again, when you're 15 or 16, this is a fraught thing for our Gen X brains to get around it.
Yeah, but the thing is, though, to try to end on a high note, then, I mean, to go back to your ritual of gratitude, what is one thing that you feel grateful for today, then? So.
Oh, obviously my wife and my children. They're incredible. They're really great. And I wasn't always so sure I was going to have a family. And I waited a long time to get married. I waited a long time to make sure that the person I was with was really someone that I was going to be great with. And I didn't know I would have children. I wasn't convinced I'd have children. And the fact that I did has been an enormous blessing, enormous. And so that right there, I mean, I know that's the easy answer. Yay, your spouse and kids, but it's true. It's pretty great. And not everybody makes that choice, and I respect that choice too. But for me, it was the right choice.
I think these days that's not an easy answer, because not everybody would answer that, and for you to be truly grateful of, the responsibilities that you have as a man and, moving forward like that. I think it's actually quite incredible and quite inspiring to others.
Thank you. And I want to stress that I have a lot of friends who didn't make that choice, and there's no judgment whatsoever. Everyone has. I know some people who don't have kids who are extremely happy.
Yeah.
And I know people who are single who are extremely happy being single. And that's everyone's choice. I didn't even know it was going to be the right choice for me until I went through it. And it's turned out to be, the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. But that's
Right.
me. That's me. That's not necessarily. I'm not certainly advocating anybody else to live any certain way.
Right. That's fascinating. So once again, the title of your first book about overcoming was called.
The title's up in the air. I'm working with the editor right now. I think it's going to be called "And Then It Just Got Worse," because everything I did after cancellation just made everything worse. Every move I made, I gave a speech, I worked at freelance, and everything I did just seemed to blow up in my face.
Okay.
So it's the subtitle is like blundering through cancellation. And that's sort of what I did for years, is blundered through it. And of course things would flare up and everyone would get mad at me again. So it's like I couldn't seem to do anything right. So it's a funny take on that. Not funny, but like a very honest take on the pain and the seriousness, but also the search for good out of what was a kind of a shit situation.
That's fascinating.
And then the other one, the next one, the advertising book is right now. I hope you get this title. The working title is Freakouts, High Lives, and Crazy Ones. Stories from Advertising's Titanium Age. Freakouts was Whopper Freakout, the fantastic piece of work that Crispin did years ago.
Okay.
High Lives is Miller High Life, which is a great campaign that Wyden and Kennedy did, which is one of my favorite campaigns of all time, and a creative that Jeff Kling did was phenomenal. And Crazy Ones is the famous Apple campaign. Here's the Crazy Ones. But it's also about the people and the stories of that age, the crazy things that happened in that age. One of my favorite stories is there was a Diet Coke spot with a guy riding an ostrich, and he was riding an ostrich through a mall. I don't know if you remember it. It's nuts. But Tony Kaye shot it, and as he was trying to sell it to the client's like, "What's it going to look like?" And they opened the door, and they just had the ostrich come in, and the ostrich ran around the room, and it was causing chaos, and everyone's yelling and laughing, and the director was like, "It's going to look like this."
Right.
And like that's such a great story on how to sell an idea, like just make it happen in front of people.
Yeah.
And that's how they sold the idea. A fantastic creator named Roger Camp told me that story, and that kind of swashbuckling, wild atmosphere was something we're trying to capture in the book and show that I think creativity needs crazy. You know what I mean? And so to really thrive, that's sort of one of our catchphrases in it. It kind of does. And it's a salute to that. It's a salute to the wildness of those years.
Yeah. If only we could even just capture a portion of that in our podcast here today, which I hope we did. Once again, thank you so much, Ted, for being such a great guest.
Chris, you're a fantastic interviewer. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to have you back. Hopefully, even when one of your books releases. There's no better place to plug a book than here. So
I'd be happy to talk to you again. That'd be great.
Thank you so much, Ted. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Chris.
Yeah, have a great night. We'd be happy to give your Salesforce org a second look. Thank you for subscribing. We look forward to seeing you on our next episode.